Hello, my Gretchin, and welcome back to Happy Krump and Wargaming. You asked for it, and I have delivered. Today, we're going to be talking about the exceptionally exciting, the clanky, the stompiest robots in all the land. We have the Dread Mob. If you've checked these out before, you know what I'm going to be delivering today. What I'll be delivering is I'm going to be talking about all the strengths and weaknesses of this detachment. I'm going to be talking specifically about the units that benefit from the detachment. So don't get mad at me if I don't talk about how Storm Boys do in this detachment, because the Storm Boys, well, yes, I'll probably take a unit of Storm Boys in a list with this detachment. They have nothing to do with this detachment. It's just a good unit overall. So don't be yelling at me because I'm not going to explain Storm Boys. I've done that a million times, and maybe I'll do that in like a just general Orc video later down the road. But we're talking about the strengths and the weaknesses of the Dread Mob. So I'm going to be going through all the data sheets that benefit for it. We'll talk about the enhancements, the stratagems, the combinations that you need to know to play. We'll be talking about the play style, and I'm going to be breaking down the mathematics down behind a lot of these units, because some of them don't hit as hard as you might think, and some of them hit a lot harder than you might think. When you really get into the nitty gritty. So we're going to break all that down. And then finally, at the end of the video, I am going to give you a starter list that is working pretty dang well right now. There's going to be innovations in the meta as things develop, but we'll give you a great starting place for all of your Dread Mob needs. Now, let's pop right into it. The Dread Mob. Now, here's the deal, guys. Number one, right off the bat, thing I have to say to you, because it just has to be said. They are very, very terrain dependent. This is not an army that I'm going to be taking to any tournament. I'm only taking this to tournaments where the terrain that can support them. The optimal Dread Mob list are hard to move because they're all vehicles and they all have massive bases, and it can be quite challenging to get like a unit of 6 Killa Kans to all have line of sight against a target simply because of the angles of the way that terrain is on a lot of maps. So Dread Mob, in my opinion, probably is not going to be seen on WTC style terrain very often because the terrain does not support the army, and it really limits the army a lot. Now, that being said, if you're doing a player placed or playing on GW terrain, or actually, honestly, even in the UKTC, so if you're one of my UKTC friends out there, you're probably going to see a lot of fun things that you can probably do with Dread Mob, because Dread Mob does actually give you a lot of options on the maps that give you wider lanes to move through. So WTC, it's probably not happening. GW, UKTC, great. All right. Basically, here's what Dread Mob does. All your walkers, your mechs, and your grot vehicles become viable. The things that suck and couldn't be taken in other detachments rock and get to be taken in this attachment. Now, there is a hilarious little thing. There's no such thing as a grot's vehicle in the codex. It just doesn't exist. There's a keyword specific to Dread Mob, where each time for their detachment rule, just try that button, which says each time a mech, Orks walker, or grot's vehicle unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, roll a d6 and you determine the ability. The 3 abilities are going to be lethal, sustained, or critical wounds give you an extra 2 to your AP. Now, here's the deal. There's no such thing as a grot's vehicle in the entire codex. I know people are going to yell at me. There is a Mek gun, and that has the Grot's keyword, and it has the vehicle keyword, but it doesn't have the Grot's vehicle keyword, which is kind of hilarious. Now, anyone who tells you you're not allowed to use your Mek guns in this detachment is probably just a jerk and an asshole, and I wouldn't listen to them unless it was for like a top-level tournament that you're just really, really training for. So, in my book, run your freaking Mek guns. It's pretty clear that they're intended to be able to benefit from this, but you know what? Technically, rules written, no, they're not. Anyway, let's move on to it. So they're very good on GW terrain, very, very struggle bus on WTC terrain. Now, and it's also going to be a very stat-checky army. Now, here's one thing that people are, I'm hearing talk about on the internet a lot, which is just, it's not good advice, so I'm going to correct that advice. You are very rarely going to be rolling for your buff. So try that button, though that's the detachment roll. What it says is that if you have a mechs, a walker, or a grot's vehicle unit that wants to, whenever they're selected to make an attack, that's fight, shoot, so you can do this in Overwatch, for example, you get to roll a d6. And on a, let's just look at the chart so I say it correctly, on a 1 to 2, you get sustained hits 1 on all your weapons. On a 3 to 4, you get lethal hits on all of your weapons. On a 5 to 6, you get AP plus 2 on your critical wound rolls. People think that it's great. Oh, it's cool. It's random. I'm just going to randomize it. Now, there's another part to this special ability, and the ability is you get to, instead of rolling, you can select one of those 3 buffs. The only problem is, if you select one of those 3 buffs, all your weapons gain the hazardous keyword. And there is a caveat to the description, which says, if your weapons get the hazardous keyword from multiple sources, then you fail your hazardous test on a roll of a 1 or a 2, which is actually a big deal. So your units will be committing suicide a lot. Now, people think this won't be a big deal because you're never going to be selecting, but my friends, you're going to be selecting. You're going to be selecting a lot. There's actually very few units in this army that you're ever going to randomly roll for. And I'll kind of explain as we go through all the units. So let's just jump right into this. What has the keywords to actually benefit from this attachment? Well, you get the mech. You get the big mech. You get the big mech and mega armor. You got the big mech with shock attack on all of your flavors of mech. Now, the cool thing is, since this applies to units that have the mech, Orks, Walker, or a Grotz vehicle keyword, remember there's no such thing as a Grotz vehicle, anything you attach a mech to gets to benefit from a lot of the stratagems, and it gets to benefit, well, actually, really not any of the stratagems, but it does get to one of the stratagems, but it does get to really, really benefit from the detachment rule, which is the try that button. That's when you attach your mechs to it. And that's kind of cool. It's kind of useful. It does give you the opportunity to make some interesting units that we will talk about here in just a little bit. Now, then we have a Deff Dread. Is a Deff Dread finally usable? How about the Killa Kans, guys? Or Killa Kans, all you guys out there. I call them Killa Kans. Fight me in the comments over it. Anyway, Killa Kans, kind of rock stars. Mek Guns, technically no, but anyone who tells you the answer is no to that is a jerk, and I would ignore them. And then you have the Morkanaut, the Gorkanaut, and the Stompa. So basically, our big Stompy robots are going to get usable, and I'm going to talk in detail about how we're going to use all of them in this video. So let's start talking about the enhancements, though, because this is really where we're going to build the foundation of our army. Smoky Gubbins, unit gains stealth. Pretty obvious what this goes on. This goes on a big mech and mega armor who's leading mega knobs, because suddenly you're going to, because yes, I know, but you really want this unit. You really want mega knobs in this unit because you're going to need something that can survive and stand on objective. You just need it. And when the big mech leads them, he's resurrecting one once per turn. It's very, very nice. They certainly hit a little bit harder in melee when you consider the fact that you get to roll for lethal sustained or whatever. But giving them stealth, so now they're -1 to be hit with a 2-up in cover, with a 4-up invuln, because you're going to give it the custom force field always. And then suddenly you also get to resurrect 1 per turn. This becomes a very hard kill unit that is very important to have to hold your objectives in this army. Then the Super Glowy Thing. Command phase each time within 18 inches and visible. That's very important. And visible, roll a d6. 1 to 2, that enemy unit takes a battle shock test on a 3 to 4. D3 mortals on a 5 to 6. -1 to be hit until your next command phase. This is like kind of bad. I don't think you're ever going to see it. The randomization might be fun, but in competitive, it's pretty dang bad, and it's pretty hard to set up because your mech is going to have to be within 18 inches of the enemy unit, and they have to be visible to you in your command phase, which means you have to plan like 2 turns ahead to get this to work. It's very challenging. The only time I really see this coming up super well is maybe with like a big mech who's leading a unit of boys. Maybe then, but honestly, I'm just not taking this. Then you have Press It Fasta. This is one of the enhancements that immediately sounds awesome, and then you realize it's not. So it only works in shooting, so you can't use this one in the fighting phase when you're trying to press that button. But you get to roll twice, and you can take both results for try that button. However, if you roll a duplicate, you only get the 1 result. It's so restrictive, it sucks. It's paying points for a gamble, and it doesn't help. It's just not good. There are some people out there who are trying to claim that you can select one and roll for the other. Wrong, you can't do it. Stop trying to game the system. You can have that fight out with your TOs, but any TO who rules that is just, not great at the game. Anyway, Get Finder Goggles. This is a good enhancement. Units' weapons ignore cover. This is actually pretty cool, and it does open up a really neat combination that we're going to talk about in a little bit, where I'll go through the math of Lootas. Woohoo, spicy. All right, let's talk about the strats. These strats are pretty dang cool on surface level. Sometimes you're just not going to be using them very much. So Clank and Claws. This works for an Orks Walker unit only. So this is only really going to be used on your Deff Dreads, your Morkanaut, or your Killa Kans when they are in melee. You get +2 to strength, and if you choose to push it, you gain +1 of the damage and gain hazardous. Now, the push it keyword is a little bit of an interesting thing. I'm going to talk about that when we get to bigger shells for bigger gets. And so we'll talk about it then. But if you push it, you get +1 to the damage and you gain hazardous. Now, this is actually really exciting because now suddenly we have a Deff Dread who's running in with very high strength, who can be getting actual quite good damage in melee. Thinking about getting a Gorkanaut to a damage 3 sweep, ooh, that is a little bit spicy. So this is a very cool stratagem that can be quite useful. It is also worth noting that all of these stratagems are only 1 CP, so you will have plenty of CP to play around with. Superfueled Boiler. Now, this is one that we will be using quite a bit. just after an Orcs Walker unit is selected to advance. You get to then reroll advance rolls, and you gain assault on all the weapons. This is going to be used pretty much every single turn because a lot of the guns that we have in this army, well, almost all of them, do not have the assault keyword. Well, which makes getting angles and line of sight very dang challenging. This is a stratagem that will stack really well in the WA when your army's units gain the ability to advance and charge as well. So using this on, say, a Gorkanaut during the WA phase, you get to advance the Gorkanaut, shoot all of its stuff, and then still get to charge it in. Could be quite cool. So Super Fuel Boiler is a solid stratagem. You're going to be using it a ton. Bigger shells for bigger gets. This is probably the epitome of this detachment. This is the stratagem that's going to be used constantly. You get to use it on a mech, a walker, or a Grotz vehicle unit. Remember, there's no such thing as a Grotz vehicle. Pour one out for your homies. It's stupid. A unit that has not been selected to shoot when you're targeting a monster or vehicle, you get to gain +1 to wound. This is good. Now, if you push it, you get to add 1 to the damage. Ranged weapons will then gain hazardous. Now, you only gain hazardous if you push it, which gives you +1 to the damage. Now, there is a controversy regarding this stratagem, and there are a lot of people arguing about this, and I gotta be honest with you, I don't know the correct answer. I have posted the question to a lot of the powers that be to see if we can get a response. So I'm gonna give you 2 different perspectives on how this stratagem works. There are people who are going to argue both ways, and I'm sure you're going to argue in the chat, and actually I'm really interested to see what you have to say in the chat, whether you think it works one way or the other way. I'll give you my bias, but it is my bias, so I'm not certain if it is correct, although I do think it is more correct. So effectively, the argument right now is, if you use this stratagem because of the way that it is worded, do you get to add 1 to the damage against any target? Or does that only apply to vehicles or monsters? Now, I shorthanded it for this video, but I'm going to read the actual stratagem for you. All right, target, blah, blah, blah. Effect. Each time you use this stratagem, you can choose to push it, period. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack that targets a monster or vehicle, add 1 to the wound roll, period. If you choose to push it, comma, add 1 to the damage characteristic of that attack, and until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by models in your unit have the hazardous ability. Now, me personally, I think what this means is that you only get the +1 to wound when you're targeting a monster or vehicle, but you can push it and add 1 damage to your weapons against any target. That's what I think this says. I do not know for sure if that's what it says, because it is interestingly worded. The period right there really gives the rules lawyers the opportunity to fight. So this is a stratagem that I encourage you to pose that question to your TO before you show up for your tournament, because it can be ruled either way. We have posted it in the WTC official Discord, have not gotten a response yet. We've posted it with some other people, have not gotten any consensus. Some people think it works, some people think it doesn't. TO question, baby. All right. The rest of the strats, Daka. This is an awesome stratagem. You're going to be using it every single turn. It will increase the output of your guns by an incredible amount. Shooting phase, Walker Grotz vehicle, reroll hit rolls of 1. If you push it, reroll the hit roll, and weapons gain hazardous until the end of the phase. You're essentially always going to push it because you're always going to be getting full hit rerolls. This is going to be something that you're always going to stack with selecting sustained hits 1. Or potentially lethal hits against some targets for your unit roll. So you're going to have hazardous on 2 stats. So whatever unit you use this on, they're going to be failing hazardous rolls on 1s and 2s, which is spicy. But it can dramatically increase the damage output of your shooting units. Then we have conniving runs. This is actually a fantastic stratagem, and I'm going to show you using TTS in just a little bit how to maximize it. Movement phase. Enemy ends a normal advance or fallback maneuver within 9 inches. Select 1 Gretchin unit and roll a d6. On a 4-up, that enemy unit suffers d3 plus 1 mortals, and you get to make a normal move. This is a awesome stratagem. And I did fail to mention one other thing at the beginning of the video. Gretchin gained battle line keyword in this detachment. There is a real world where I can see myself taking 6 units of Gretchin in this detachment for all that sweet OC and amazing move blocking ability. So there's a reality for that. And you are going to be CP starved, so having lots of Gretchin for CP farming is a good idea as well. So this is a great stratagem. I'm going to show you how to use it in a few slides. Then we have the extra gubbins stratagem. Shooting phase, Walker Grotz vehicle, non-Titanic, which sucks. Pour one out for my homies because the stratagem was almost insane and it's just okay as is. You get to subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of attacks each time an attack is allocated to a model in the unit. So this effectively will only ever be used on Killa Kans. It does, however, make Killa Kans a lot tankier than your opponent might be prepared for because they do have 5 wounds each. -1 damage will make each one require 3 damage 3 attacks because they'll go down to damage 2, or 5 damage 2 attacks. That's pretty solid, actually, and it really does increase the durability of the unit a lot. You're going to be using this. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes. We got to talk about the units and how we're going to actually strategize and use them in the army. We have the Mek. Likely, this boy is running solo, and his job is to buff up our big walkers. If you're going to take a Deff Dread, you might have them buff them. If you're taking a Gorkanaut, Morkanaut, you're 100% going to be running one next to them to be healing them and to be buffing them for the +1 to hit, because you need the +1 to hits for any of these units to be viable. Which is one of the reasons why Dread Mob is going to be one of the weakest factions or detachments in Codex Orks. And I do think that's true, but that doesn't mean they're unplayable, and I do think it's still going to be very, very usable. Then we have the Big Mek. Now, this guy is interesting to me. One, I freaking love the model. The Big Mek, his model is so sick. That new dude is a total badass, like total Chad. However, his ability and his guns and his weapons kind of suck. But his ability is interesting. So what his ability does is it allows your unit that he's attached to ignore models, walls, terrain, anything as if it wasn't there when they're making like their normal moves. Which does open up a sneaky little strategy where you can actually stack Mek guns against a ruined wall so that they are safe out of line of sight during deployment. And then in your turn 1, you can actually move them. Now they only have a 3-inch move, but you get to move them through a wall with 3 inches, because you actually can as long as they start touching that wall, and then get a different angle that your opponent's not expecting on Mek guns. This is actually a pretty cool thing. Now, unfortunately, and this does suck, Superfeud Boiler, which is the one that allows us to advance and shoot, or we'll get assault on our weapons, only applies to Ork Walkers, which means you cannot advance your Mek guns and shoot, which is really dumb, and it's just one of the many instances of like a silly keyword lock that shouldn't be in the Codex that is stopping this from being actually like a really good detachment and just being like a fun one. That can put up some numbers. All right, then we got the Big Mek and Mega Armor. This guy rocks. I've spoken about him a lot in Bully Boys. He does the exact same thing in this detachment. He just makes the unit hard as heck to kill. You're going to give him Smoky Gubbins for only 10 points, and that is totally worth it. Giving them stealth, they're going to be resurrecting. They're going to be hard to kill. It is a fantastic model to have lead your Mega Knobs. Big Mek with Shock Attack Gun. This dude with the Get Find Goggles for ignoring cover is going to be attached to my Lootas. And there's something really surprising. I don't want to spoil it, so I'll talk about it in just a few slides when we get onto the Lootas. All right, now this is our mechs, because remember, our mechs, whenever they attach to a unit, they actually do get to unlock the detachment ability for that unit. So one, boys, you could run a mech with the boys. Now, I probably want them naked because all the boys' job in my book is going to be, they're going to clear screen and they are going to sticky objectives. So I'm probably going to run them naked, but you can run a mech with them if you want to give them the ability to roll and potentially get sustained hits or something. It just seems like a really expensive tax that I don't want to pay for. Lootas. There is one very specific build that I've hinted at, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Mek guns. Here's the deal with the Mek guns, guys. And honestly, this is the problem with like kind of the entire detachment. Our mechs only add +1 to hit, and they heal one model, not unit. So you can't add +1 to hit to, say, your Mek guns. You can't add +1 to hit to your Killa Kans. You can add +1 to hit to one of the Mek guns in a unit, or you could add +1 to hit to one of the Killa Kans. I think there's a huge missed opportunity where there was a 35-point enhancement that they could have put on a mech that would allow his buff to apply to the whole unit, and that would have been a good enhancement. However, GW. Knobs. You're never going to run a mech with knobs. It's just not happening. That's a stupid decision. Don't do it. Tank Busters, because you can run a basic mech with Tank Busters. Don't do it. Tank Busters are an awful unit. And I think it's just because they're Finecast and GW doesn't want to release a new mold for them. So they're like 110 points for 5 models, and you're never going to take it. They already have +1 hit and wound against targets they want to shoot anyway. So if you were taking it, it's like, I don't know. It's just a terrible unit for the damage the output that actually does. It doesn't really threaten much of anything. Like, one unit does not kill a Rhino, which is kind of shocking. But yeah, so Tank Buster is kind of below. Even though you can attach a mech, you won't. Mega Knobs. Now this is a little bit interesting. I am very, very likely going to be running that Big Mech and Mega Armor with my Mega Knobs with the Smoky Gubbins in order to give them stealth. I think that I like that a lot. So let's talk about those Mega Knobs. So these guys are, you know, they're just the backbone of Orks in general right now. I think having one unit in every detachment is just going to be great. Could you run Gazkul in your Dread Mob? Yeah, of course. I'm probably not running him, but he can. You can run him with just 2, which is kind of interesting. So they can just like run through walls, kind of give a little support to different units. So I mean, Gaz is definitely viable, but I mean, I wouldn't be running him. I'm just going to talk more about the Mega Knobs in general with the Big Mech here. I'm probably going double kill saw loadout. I'm definitely not taking guns because guns on Mega Knobs suck, and you're never going to do anything, even with sustained hits 1. I mean, no, you're never going to do anything with the Mega Knobs guns. If you've looked at the math on it, it's absolutely atrocious into anything. It doesn't matter if you've played a single game and you just spiked like crazy, and I know you killed a Land Raider with your Mega Knobs shooting in 1 game. It's never happening again, and that probably never happened anyway. So you're going to run them with their double kill saws when it's with the Big Mech, I think, in Mega Armor, I think, because you really want to be able to convert. Some people think you want the Warboss and Mega Armor, but in this particular attachment for Dread Mob, we're always going to go Big Mech in Mega Armor. So suddenly they're going to be 3 wounds T6 with the 2-up armor save, with the 4-up invuln, with the 4-up feel no pain in the wall, and you're going to be resurrecting 1 per turn, and they're going to have stealth, which makes them -1 to hit. They are going to be tough, and they can survive on objective, which is just what the doctor ordered. Let's talk about these Lootas. This is the Loota strategy that I've been alluring to. So this was a very funny story. We're sitting in my Discord. If you're not a member of the Happy Crumping Discord, you should be, because it's an awesome place where we talk about really cool stratagems and techniques all the freaking time. So one of my moderators, Felix, who was just on the recent like Ork tier list with me, he's a brilliant player, and he's a mathematician, and so he really gets into the weeds on things, and he hates Lootas. And he went on this big long thread in the Discord trying to prove to us how awful Lootas were. And by doing so, he convinced us all that Lootas are actually a pretty good choice in Dread Mob specifically, because when he ran the math to disprove them, he was like, crap, it's actually pretty solid. So here's what we're going to do, okay? We're going to lead Lootas with a mech. It's probably going to be a shock attack gun, but you could run them with other things as well. So we're going to run them with a mech. For this example, I'm going to go with the shock attack gun. The cool thing is that they are not walkers, so they can't use your Daka stratagem, but they don't need it because they're all going to be re-rolling hit rolls, because you're always going to be targeting a unit that's on an objective. In all reality, this unit for me is going to be started in strat reserve. With full strat buffs, they are going to get 7.3 damage on a Land Raider, which is pretty cool because that is only AP1. But that AP1 does ignore cover, so it's going to be taking the Land Raider to a 3-up save. They're going to be at +1 to wound, and they're going to be at +1 damage from the strats that you're going to use, which is going to be bigger shells for bigger gits. Now, if they use AOC, the Lootas are only going to deal 3.6 damage. However, then you have baited out the AOC, and it can't be used anywhere else. So this does not include the shock attack gun, which is then going to do an additional 7 wounds on average, or 5.6 if they use AOC. Then you have the 2 rocket launches from the Spannas for a total of 3.3 extra damage, or 2.2 if there is AOC, which basically means if they don't use AOC, your Lootas will blow up a Land Raider in shooting, which is freaking hilarious, and actually a really strong ability that most people will not be expecting. So Lootas, now some of your guys are going to kill themselves on hazardous rolls afterwards, so be prepared for that. But it is a very, very cool and interesting little piece of tech that you can have in strat reserve. You could start them in a truck. There's lots of options that you can use Lootas for. Now, I would never use Lootas, but outside of being a 5-man to do actions, unless I was in Dread Mob and I ran this specific unit. And I would never run 2 either, because this one big unit of 10 only works. It only works because they ignore cover from the enhancement. So if you don't have that enhancement, don't bother. It's just going to be garbage. Anyway, let's go back. Let's move on to Gretchin now. So Gretchin, these guys become battle line. So yeah, man, 6 units of Gretchin are freaking awesome. They get reactive movements, and when you get reactive movements, guys, what this does is it opens up the ability to steal objectives, to deny secondaries. It lets you deny opponent's charges. It does a lot of really, really cool things. And when I say deny charges, no, you can't end with an engagement range, but I'm going to show you on the next slide what I mean when I say that. So basically, this is how I encourage you to use your Gretchin. So if I have Gretchin intermingled with my Killa Kans here, and they're all like, hey, we're standing on the objective too, we're just getting OC, that's really cool. And then my opponent moves up his Death Company Marines, and he's like, cool, I'm just going to charge those Killa Kans and gonna slaughter them, and they're all going to die, and you're going to be sad, and it's not going to be fun for you to play the game. Well, my Gretchin are going to say, not today, sir, because they just get to move on up, and then the Death Company will get to charge in, they'll call all of the Gretchin, maybe one will hit a Killa Kan, and then you get to pile in with your Killa Kans and wipe the squad. So, Gretchin are freaking awesome, and I highly encourage you to be running them a lot. This is a scenario that might not be the easiest to set up, but with a little bit of foresight and a little bit of thinking, you'll be able to set up a scenario like this all the time, and it will seriously hamper your opponent's ability to get to your clanky robots. So, take a look at it, guys. Definitely do it. Deff Dread. I love the Deff Dread. I love him. He's still too damn expensive. Like, GW can't figure it out. He's so expensive. It is just unreasonable. Compare what you get for an Ork Deff Dread at 130 to a Tyranid Haruspex. It is shocking, the difference. Compare what you get for an Ork Deff Dread at 130 for, I don't know, man, like anything, like any other tank. It's just not a good unit. If he was 100 points, I would love him, and I think he would be very valuable. But at 130, he's just absolutely insane. However, inside of the Dread Mob, this guy comes to life, because now he is a 2-up in cover, and with -1 damage, he becomes a lot more annoying to shoot. Now, you're going to be wanting to have a little bit of a mech unit somewhere near him so that you can be healing him and buffing him with +1 to hit. Typically, when you're running these dudes, it's always 4 claws. I'm never taking a gun on him. It's always going to be 4 claws. There is an argument for him, and let me show you this math here. There is an argument for him where you might run 4 custom Mega Blasters or rocket launches with the mech buff. Because when you stack that with a Daka stratagem for reroll hit rolls, plus the bigger shells for bigger gets, and you can potentially even go advance to shoot. Mind you, that would be a 3 CP turn for one model. The homeboy, he kills a Rhino in shooting. He does 18 damage or 24 damage if there's no cover. Or he'll do 9 damage or 13.5 damage to a Land Raider if there's no cover. If you're shooting Mega Knobs outside of wall, you're going to kill 4 of them. If there's a cover, you're going to kill 1. However, in melee, you can also get him hitting on 2s because you're going to give him +1 to hit. Because like I said, any of this really, really will require you having a mech to buff this bad boy. So you're going to give him +2 strength, getting his strength up quite damn high, and then giving him +1 damage, putting him up to that sweet, sweet damage 4. Homeboy is suddenly slapping. He can do 14 damage to a Rhino or 10 damage to a Land Raider in melee. He can also be forcing the Battle Shock test. He does actually do some slappage, which is a pretty cool thing to experience in Orks. So the Deff Dread becomes reasonable in the Dread Mob. I still can't take them in any other detachment, but here, there's actual options. Cool, let's go on to the boys. The reason why I put boys here is because you can run them with the big mech. Now, I'm not going to talk about any other unit, really, that doesn't directly benefit from the being in Dread Mob, but when you run them with a big mech, this is one of the scenarios, and really the whole reason I had this slide is to show you a scenario where you might actually just roll randomly for your buff versus selecting a buff. So, with the Deff Dread, you're always going to be selecting sustained hits, potentially lethal hits. But you're not going to go for critical wounds giving you an extra AP on his guns. With the boys, you might just roll it because you don't really care. So this might also be an example of a time where you could have like the enhancement. I forgot the name of it as we speak. What is it? The press it faster button. But it only applies in shooting. So it's like, I mean, what are you going to do? Get like sustained and lethal on the Ork pistols? Like, but they don't care. So you're just never going to take that enhancement. I go back on that immediately. But Orks are cool. With a big mech, they get to phase in and out and through units, so they can't be screened. There's some interesting thoughts there. Like I said, I'm probably going to take them naked. But anyway, move on. Let's move on to the stars of the show, because these bad boys are what makes the Dread Mob work. Killa Kans got a little bit of a glow up in the codex, and they are cool, and they are not that expensive. I do think they should come down a wee bit, but they are nice. And just to kind of give you an example of like how overpriced that Deff Dread is, 1 Deff Dread is more expensive than 3 Killa Kans. Anyway, they have a ability, and their ability is pretty dang cool. But I'm very rarely ever going to use their ability because these guys are already going to have 2 CP sunk into them every single time they activate, which means they're going to be taking hazardous on 1s to 2s. And then their special ability has the opportunity to just kill one of these bad boys before they even get to activate. So if you don't know what it is, Shooty Power Trip. Each time this unit is selected to shoot, you can roll 1d6. On a 1 or 2, this unit suffers d6 mortals. Oof. On a 3 to 4, add 1 to the strength characteristic of ranged weapons. On a 5 to 6, until the end of the phase, add 1 to the attacks. Now, getting +1 strength or +1 to your attacks is actually very, very enticing. However, when you roll a 1 or a 2, you're going to take d6 mortals, and those mortals will go through before you actually shoot, which sucks. Really, really sucks. Each time this unit is selected to shoot, you choose 1d6. This unit suffers d6 mortals. That is awful. Anyway, this whole unit loves the -1 damage strat. It's freaking fantastic. They're honestly going to make use of every single strat in the entire codex, or the entire detachment, outside of the reactive moves, because they are not Gretchin. They might be Grats, but they don't have that Gretchin keyword. Rockets seem to be the best, but there are arguments for other guns. Now, here's the deal. This goes back to the conversation we were having earlier when we were going through the strats. If bigger shells for bigger gets does give you the ability to be +1 damage when you push it, and you're not hurting a monster in a vehicle, the other guns become very viable because damage to Scorches is hilarious. Damage to Grotzukas is actually pretty awesome. But it really, really relies on your TO's interpretation of that stratagem, which means I really hope GW offers up an FAQ. I hope WTC offers up an FAQ, because if it's the case where you can get the +1 damage without having to target a monster or vehicle, then suddenly their other weapons become very viable. Without it, it's only rockets. And honestly, even if you can do that, rockets are probably still the best option, but suddenly Grotzukas become very fascinating. So I did some math, and the math that I did here, I assumed that we're getting +1 to the damage of the guns. So if you have Grotzukas, this is on a 6-man, and that's going to be 6d3 plus, what is it, 6 times, plus 18, plus an extra 2, so 24 shots, so we're going to do 6d3 plus 24 shots, right? This is going to be hitting 12 Marines. You're going to be killing 12 Marines with those guns. And then you're going to be killing 2.5 Meganobs with those guns. That's actually kind of dang cool. Now, it is important to know that the Meganobs are going to be having cover, which is... Oh, actually, no. I didn't include cover because they ignore cover with the Grotzuka, which is pretty cool. Then you get to compare how Grotzukas with +1 damage actually apply to rockets. And it's not even close, right? Like, you kill 6 megas with the rockets, which is just better. I think you kill 2 less Marine bodies, but you kill much stronger elite infantry. You'll do 12 damage to a Land Raider. You do 21 damage to a Rhino. So their shooting becomes actually spicy with the rocket launchers. So even though Grotzukas are viable, if you can get the +1 damage without having to target a monster vehicle, it's still going to be the rockets. The Khan Shooter is cute because suddenly they can get dev wounds and it's damage too. But like, you're kind of relying on rolling those 6s to wound, which just... while it's cool, it's just not as good. So I'm still going to be running rockets all the time. However, there is an argument for Grotzukas if your TO rules for you or GW releases an FAQ, which I seriously hope they do, because this is going to cause a lot of fights at the table, that you can get the +1 damage when you're not targeting a monster in vehicle. Anyway, Mek Guns. They're really only an option on GW. Just on WTC terrain, they're never going to get the angles and moving 3 inches, even if you attach them to a big mech, which is a huge, points shackle. They're still never going to get the angles that you need to actually be able to get clear line of sights. And then they only hit on 4s with mediocre guns. So in GW, they're actually quite good because they have the long range and they can provide you with a lot of fire support. They get the native reroll 1s to hit against starting strength units. So they're actually pretty cool. Never going to touch them on GW. They did get a little bit nerfed in the codex. Well, side graded, I would say, because custom mega cannons are now only AP1 for some ludicrous reason. I have no idea why. That's just stupid. And the answer to them is no. You're never going to take them. So now the real options are you going to take the Smasha or the Bubble Chukkas? Those are the 2 options if you're trying to do any sort of competitive play with them. I like Bubble Chukkas personally, but Smasha Guns, giving that AP3 damage 3 is a pretty cool thing when we are talking about orc shooting. So those are 2 options. Units of these might be really nice on GW terrain. So see how it goes. Then we go on to the Morkanaut and the Gorkanaut, and we are getting ready to wrap up the unit part of this, and we're going to go into the list building very, very soon. Now, I love the Morkanaut and the Gorkanaut. GW hates the Morkanaut and the Gorkanaut, which is why they still don't have a 2-up armor save for a ludicrously high cost of 290 points, or 280 for the Gorkanaut, 295, I think, for the Morkanaut, or something like that. They're actually quite cool in Dread Mob. Now, you need an orc, you need a mech escort. Now, I say it's highly encouraged, but in all reality, you need one. Sadly, these bad boys can't use the -1 damage strat, which sucks. And remember, they are Titanic, which means they do not overwatch. However, being towering, that does give them a huge advantage where they can just toe in on terrain and they get to, and they're super tall, so they can just kind of get angles that your opponent's not expecting them to get, which is a pretty cool thing. Whenever you shoot them, you're going to want your Daka and your bigger shells for bigger gets. You're going to stack them. There is a pretty interesting conversation about whether you want the Morkanaut or the Gorkanaut, because they're better into different targets, right? So the Morkanaut is going to be better into your bigger, tougher targets. Your Gorkanaut's going to be much better into your smaller targets. So a Gorkanaut with 30 shots, gets to reroll hit rolls that have sustained inbuilt, actually becomes kind of spicy when you're going into chaff. But the Morkanaut gets all of those benefits when he's shooting, say, like a Rhino or the Land Raider or the Predator or the whatevers. So neither one is actually better than the other, but they are, there's definitely a real conversation for both. Now, the Morkanaut also is a little bit tougher with that 5-up invuln, which is very, very nice. But either way, you're going to take one based off of what you need in your particular list. Now, when you are using all of your enhancements, say you are using the detachment rule and you're going to try the button, you're going to select sustained hits because, of course, you're going to take sustained hits. It's by far the best. And then you're going to be using bigger shells for bigger gets because you want the +1 to hit, the +1 to wound and the +1 damage against the monsters and vehicles you're trying to nuke. I really highly recommend you don't shoot the big shooter because shooting that big shooter is going to do absolutely nothing. And it's going to make you take another hazardous test for no reason. And remember, you fail hazard tests on 1s and 2s because of the way that try that button is worded. If a weapon equipped by a model from your army has the hazardous ability from multiple sources, each time you take a hazardous test for said weapon, it is failed on a roll of a 1 or 2. So don't shoot the big shooters when you're stacking all these buffs because you don't need to be taking more hazardous tests for no reason. Now, doing the math in melee is actually pretty cool because if you're doing the strike attacks with the Gorkanaut, you get access to strength 21, damage 7 attacks in melee. That is pretty sick. And then his sweep attack can get to 16, sus 1, D3, or damage 3, strength 11 sweep. That is also pretty dang spicy. So you can really buff these guys up in melee quite a bit. So they are a little bit of a threat. Damn it, GW, though. Why don't they have a 2-up armor save when you compare them to literally any other walker in the game that costs that many points? I mean, that's not true. I guess knights are more, but knights also are way better in generals. It doesn't matter. I'm going crazy. Let's talk about the Stompa. I love the Stompa. Stompa's freaking awesome. Stompa sucks. Sorry, guys. Sorry, it just doesn't work. If they had dropped him down to the 600 point, or honestly the 500 point, then I'm talking. But the reality is you can't move this guy. There is one phase where he can be hyper usable because you're going to be able to let him advance and shoot and still charge, which is in the wall phase. And then when you stack the the super fuel boiler on him. Okay, great. That's going to give him a phase. But in all reality, he's so fat, he probably still can't move because there's just nowhere for him to move on the board. He's too big to move. His guns are solid. They sound really scary with sustained hits and reroll hit rolls. And they are, to be very, very fair. But he's never moving outside of where he starts. So if you choose to run this guy, park him somewhere where he's touching like 3 pieces of terrain and he can just see the entire battlefield because he's probably never moving. He's going to be taking your reroll to hits. You might honestly not be using bigger shells for bigger gets on him. But you are almost certainly going to be giving him the reroll to hit ability or Daka stratagem. So Stompa is cool. He is not good. He is a bad model. He is so overpriced. He is impossible to move on the battlefield. I've seen a bunch of other tier lists where people are ranking him like B tier, A tier. These guys are lunatics. I love them. That doesn't mean I hate those people. They're just wrong about this. The Stompa is not a good model. It is a badass and lovely model. But let's get into the army list. This is where I encourage all of you to just kind of start. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can build this list. There's a lot of variety in this list, and there's a lot of experimentation to be done with Dread Mob, which I really, really like, by the way. But this is where I'm going to start. I'm going to explain it to you. So like I said earlier, I'm going to take that big mech in Mega Armor. I'm going to give him the Smoky Gubbins because him leading a unit of Mega Knobs is going to be key for you being able to hold on to an objective. And you do have to hold on to objectives in this game. Then I'm going to run a big mech with Shock Attack Gun and the Get Finder Goggles, which is the Ignore Cover goggle enhancement. I'm going to be attaching him to a 10-man unit of Lootas for the express reason that I talked about earlier. They're going to go kill something that your opponent is not expecting to die. You're going to tell your opponent that you hit on 6s with the Lootas, and he's going to go, I don't care about anything. And then you're going to do a lot more damage than they're prepared for, and that is what that unit is there for. Then I have 2 small mechs, and these guys are just going to be walking right behind the Morkanaut and the Gorkanaut. 10 boys, they're there for actions, OC, clearing a screen, double units of Gretchin. Now, I am debating putting a lot more Gretchin in here, and I'm debating dropping one of the big Stompy Robots. But that's for a different list. This is just where I think we should start, and it's a good place for you to start so that you get a little taste of everything, and it is going to be a fairly competitive list that we can then refine a little bit later when we get more information. Remember how I said you want to run those Gretchin with your Killa Kans or with one of your big Stompy Robots so that they can reactive move, so that they can move block. There is a kind of interesting trick where sometimes you will reactively move your Gretchin inside of a Gorkanaut, or a Morkanaut. There's lots of options like that, which could be quite useful. Then we've got 2 units of Storm Boys because you need actions to be done. You have to have access to get to places. So Storm Boys are going to make it to essentially every single detachment. It's just always going to happen. I'm running 1 Gorkanaut and 1 Morkanaut because I like both of them. Now, I do have 2 units of Killa Kans here. They're both 6-mans. There is an argument for 3-mans, but I'm going to go 6-mans. I do have 1 modeled here with rockets and 1 with Grotzukas. This is assuming bigger shells for bigger gets. Allows you to get the access to the +1 damage without having to target a monster in vehicle. But like I said, that is not definitive. It needs to be interpreted and it needs to be ruled upon, and we do need an FAQ on it. I'm sure you're going to see some people in the chat and they're going to be like, oh, no, it's definitive because I am an English major and blah, 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 blah. And they're just wrong. It's not definitive. There's a big argument about it. People have good points. So we just need an authority of the powers that be to rule on it. If that doesn't work, if they say that you can't get access to the +1 damage unless you're targeting a monster in vehicle, it's always going to be rockets. That's just the way it's going to go. Anyway, this is where I think you guys should start. Remember, Dread Mob, I do believe, is one of the weakest parts of the Codex Orks. That I would say the Cult of the Speed is the weakest, and then Dread Mob is the second weakest. That does not mean it's unplayable. It is a solid detachment that is going to bring a lot of joy and can absolutely punch up. I want to hear about all of your experiences as you're using them. Take this as your starting point, build your own brilliance. And if you want to talk more about it, you can jump into the Happy Krump and Wargaming Discord, the members section where we talk about list building, we talk about all sorts of things, we talk about freaking life, we have theory going on in there, we share music. It's a great freaking Discord. And actually, we're getting ready to even launch a health challenge, which is really freaking cool. So hop on in there. You can join either using a YouTube membership or you can sign up using my coffee link down below. Once you sign up to be a member of the Discord, then you'll just have to link either your YouTube or your coffee to Discord under Connections tab, and you'll automatically receive your role, and you can join the community and also be a happy crumper. Until next time, my grots and gits, I am out, and I hope you all have a blessed and amazing freaking day. We'll be coming back later this week with definitely Green Tide and almost certainly the Big Hunt. So, I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.